Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin, back again with another reaction video. And man, just today I came across this video and I was like, we gotta react to this, it's so cool. Basically, it's about ancient aliens in the Bible.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, so I was like, that's totally right up my alley, I want to see this. So we're gonna react to this video.
I even want to get like a saucer in here somewhere.
Yeah, you know? Floating around.
Don't forget the alien stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, let's get right into it.
The question of extraterrestrial life has lived in the minds of men and women for centuries. The question, are we alone, is one that many have desperately sought the answer to. And though, whilst the jury is still out when it comes to definitive confirmation, many believe that we as a species are just around the corner from discovering the truth. Indeed, many do believe that the government, or the powers that be, already know this truth, and that aliens aren't just a concept that keeps some awake at night, but in actuality, something that our betters have known for generations. It comes as no surprise that many of a more religious inclination might turn to the Bible for the answers, and whilst for the most part the Bible remains silent on extraterrestrials or UFOs, there are some enthusiasts and scholars who propose that the Bible does contain hidden references to encounters with beings from other worlds, and seek to interpret certain passages as evidence for extraterrestrial contact. A common idea I've seen put forward in recent years is based around the ancient astronaut theory by Swiss author Erich von Daniken, who claim that many extraterrestrial encounters are described in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, that the ancient authors who penned the Bible, or the prophets in question who experienced these encounters, just didn't have the modern vocabulary to adequately explain what they were seeing. According to this argument, it would be unreasonable for a common civilian living some 2,000 years ago to explain propulsion systems, vehicular suspension, or even gravity for that matter, let alone the fact that some spacecraft that they'd seen was defying one of the most basic laws of physics. In this sense, if someone from the Bible had seen something like a UFO, it would make sense why they would describe it with a more supernatural twist, or associate it with some magical phenomenon, or just simply chalk it up to God.
It makes sense that would be like why that would happen. You would see something that you completely don't recognize, and then I don't understand what I'm seeing, so you turn it into some like spiritual thing.
I heard one time, did I ever tell you this, that apparently when the Spaniards or whatever, when people found the New World,
the
North America, the native people couldn't recognize their ships, their giant, futuristic at that time, ships.
Yeah.
They couldn't see it. They had no reference for it.
Yeah.
I heard that once.
Yeah. I wonder if they're going to mention Ezekiel, because there's talk of like things, circular objects and stuff in the sky in Ezekiel and stuff like that. I noticed on the title this had said, "What did Moses really see on Mount Sinai?" That was part of the title.
But that is like kind of an interesting point, is the idea of having no reference and then the way your brain would reinterpret it, because the images that they're showing are flying saucers, right?
Yeah.
And so immediately to our brains they're like, well, why would you confuse that with like an angel? Why would you confuse that, angels we have seen on high came down, and that's what we're rarely aliens.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, because my mind goes, why wouldn't they say it was a big disc or it was a big wheel or something like that?
Yeah.
Maybe they'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But if they were confusing it with aliens, it's not that far-fetched, because there's no word for it yet. Flying object. Well, only birds fly.
We have all the references for all the technology and stuff that we have today that we can use, but they didn't have that, so it makes sense.
As we see in Job, God pretty much showed Job Leviathan and Behemoth to illustrate his point that the things he can create are beyond man's understanding, and no one can really understand why he does the things he does, so no one should try to. So in some ways, it would have been far more humble and respectful for the more revering believer at the time to not question what he'd seen, but instead rationalize it as something belonging to God, or rationalize it as God trying to tell them something. At worst, it's also conceivable that some at the time may have seen these phenomena as mechanisms of Satan, and so, instead of trying to understand them, chose to understandably shun them and try to forget about them altogether. Another idea I've seen put forward is that the Bible did once make more of an effort to convey these UFOs in the scripture, but that when King James got his hands on the Bible and invented the King James Version, many of the books that got to the nitty-gritty of spacecrafts, extraterrestrial machines, and beings from other planets were unceremoniously torn out and thrown away. This idea consists of a few different approaches, with some tooting that the removal of the Book of Enoch, the Book of Esdras, or the Book of Maccabees as definitive proof that King James and subsequent editors were trying to hide something. Some even going as far as to suggest that some texts were probably so specific in their detailing of UFOs that no one could argue that they were just visions from God, or divine dreams that a prophet beheld. No, according to this argument, those lost pages may have been far more damning, and might have shown us how the average civilian some 2,000 years ago might not have been as hopeless when it came to describing what they'd seen as previously suggested. During the Exodus, when Moses led his people out of Egypt and wandered in the desert towards the Promised Land, he would pitch a tent far away from the actual camp. Why? Well, it is believed that this was known as the Tent of Meeting, and was positioned outside the camp because A, it was a place where Moses could privately commune with God, and B, it showed that some of the Israelites with him had fallen out of favour with God, and thus Moses did not want to disgrace God by allowing them to be near him. Now, throughout this pilgrimage, we know that Moses and his people were led by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Exodus tells us, whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Not for the first time has the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire come under some consideration and scrutiny. How can a cloud form into a pillar? And much more, how did it stand at the entrance of the tent? When we think of cloud,
It sounds like a tornado to me.
Yeah, something like that. And I'm just marveled that, like, as someone who like has read the Bible, who's probably read Exodus like a bunch of times, how like you miss stuff and you forget about stuff. I thought they were gonna like talk about like the burning bush and stuff like that, and I was like, I don't remember the pillar of smoke and the pillar of fire standing inside the tent. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I kind of remember it a little bit. But isn't there things that talk about? Isn't there something like Daniel's wheel or something like that? There's like there's some.
What did I say like the last time? Did I bring up Ezekiel or Enoch? What did I say? Something like
maybe
that.
Enoch,
But yeah.
But there's if unless I'm wrong, I think that there's some verses in the Bible that talk about like a wheel in the sky, like one of the characters of the Bible having this vision of a wheel in the sky.
Yeah, and it makes me think about that the guy mentioned in the video that King James took books away from the Bible.
Oh yeah, that's interesting
it's like,
too.
geez, man.
And there's another thing about like a chariot in the sky or something like that too, isn't there? Like, and then he was took off in a chariot in the sky. Like that's the word you would use if you didn't have it. I guess that's like a sky chariot.
Yeah.
So that's all interesting. I have kind of a different take on it, and I don't think I'm alone. I think there's probably like a known theory of this. But when you look at gray aliens, to me, I entertain every now and then that they're some sort of projection of us in the future, like. Aleister Crowley famously was in contact with some being, and he drew it. And I think this was at the end of the 1800s, maybe early 1900s. And this entity that he was in contact with, he was like a mystical witchcraft type guy.
Yeah.
But the thing that he was contacting had a big head and like creepy sort of alien eyes, and it looked like it was in like space, like it had like a cape or something like that. But it looked a lot like a gray alien.
Yeah.
And my theory kind of is that. What if that's just a projection of where we all kind of understand we will be like in the future, because humans are so ocularly driven, like everything's visual. Our technology is developed to be so visual. We're always looking at stuff.
Yeah.
And aliens got those big black all pupil eyes. They're atrophied, which would be somebody that over time felt less and less use for their body. Eventually you get to a point where you're like, everything below the neck becomes atrophied from disuse.
Yeah.
Their heads are big, saying that they've got more
thinking
knowledge,
and processing,
becoming more cerebral more and more.
Yeah.
It begs to reason in some sense to me.
Yeah. Well,
Just in terms of gray aliens,
Good point.
clouds, we naturally imagine them to be in the sky. Some might even go as far as to say flying objects. Yet in this account, the pillar of cloud acts incongruently to how we might expect. Traditionally, this is usually just chalked up to one of God's many manifestations. He doesn't just appear at the tent, nor guide Moses by simply telling him where to go. He appears in these mysterious, often ambiguous ways to let his followers know he is there. The pillar of cloud remains to be a strange one though. Why a pillar, and why a cloud? Perhaps we must harken back to chapter 38 of the book of Job, where God explains to Job that he can't understand anything he does because it's too far beyond him to comprehend. Believers might use this concept to dissuade others from digging any further and questioning God, which traditionally would be a transgression. Put simply, God appears as a pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire because he's God, and he can appear as whatever he wants, however he wants. It's simply not our role as his creations to question him. But on the other hand, modern readers can't help but look at the pillar of cloud and think that's far too strange and random to simply be God's intended form. With this, many search for a more logical explanation, which brings us to the idea that this pillar of cloud is arguably one of the first UFOs, or perhaps product of a UFO, that is found in the Bible.
The interesting thing about crazy stories or like magical stories in anything is that it always gets divided into like some logical breakdown of how the logic of it, or it sometimes devolves into like the symbolic nature of it. Yeah. Like some people take that route, like of course, because back then people really revered clouds or something. You know what I mean? Like people usually take one of those type of things, and then if you're not going to do that, it's like what do you just take it without thinking about it. Yeah. God's God; He can make himself appear as a cloud if He wants, whatever. No more thought needed. Yeah. People be like, this is the foundation of cultures across the world. These religions create where our modern day ways of thinking. Yeah. So why did they choose that? Why would God behave in that way? And then, like I said, people either give the logic of it, or they go into like, well, it's all symbolic, and there's this symbolic meaning.
Well, I don't know. To me, it makes me like my logical brain was like, I think of a pit of fire. If you created a pit and it burned at night and it was fire at night, it would be smoke in the day.
Yeah.
That's my logical mind speaking.
That's pretty good logic.
But I'm enjoying the artistic rendering here. I'm enjoying.
The art is
giant,
cool.
The giant alien
cool.
ships with pillars of fire. Or
I wonder if they're AI generated.
Probably.
Make something look like a painting, but have it be a smoke pillar with a UFO at the top.
Remember, this isn't a vision or a lucid dream experienced by one prophet who'd been wandering in the desert by himself. No. The Bible paints this occurrence as a very real and tangible event that is witnessed not just by Moses, but by all the Israelites who were with him. The pillar of fire seen in chapter 13 of Exodus is also a very corporeal aspect to the Israelites' experience, and considering the nature of fire, it seems a far more intense and violent feature for us to get.
Yeah, what if they were magicians, for Pete's sake? Like, what if, just as a what if, guys, everybody calm down. But what if he was just a hardcore, he was the David Blaine of those days, and he got guys to go out there and carry like a fire on a big plank around. Yeah.
That's why he's out there by himself.
Yeah, he's like, there it is. Don't go catch up to it. You'll be incinerated. But there's a pillar of smoke out there, and it's just, they're carrying it, because people need a miracle.
Get our head around. We are told, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Later, God actually sits atop the pillar of fire and cloud, and from his vantage point throws the Egyptian army into confusion. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. Again, we aren't told exactly how God throws the Egyptian army into confusion, aside from jamming the wheels of their chariots. But those who subscribe to the pillar of cloud and fire being some kind of extraterrestrial spacecraft, another UFO, are unconvinced that this was enough to stop the pursuit of the Egyptians.
There's some people watching this that are like, it wasn't a damn UFO. It wasn't like that.
This picture looks like Star Wars.
An argument for this is that the Egyptians had no reason to give up chasing the Israelites although broken chariot wheels is a fairly big obstacle, and that they would not have simply turned and fled under the belief that another god was against them. Instead, believers of this theory suggest that what the Egyptians saw was these pillars of fire and smoke, which, if you think about a modern machine, or even a rocket for that matter, would emit what might be described as pillars of fire and cloud, or smoke. Were the Egyptians seeing some indescribable flying spacecraft with giant thrusters beckoning beneath its mechanical underbody? If they were, it would explain why they were so quick to get the heck out of there, and let the Israelites be on their way. Most people today would turn and run at the sight of something so undeniably incredible. Later in Genesis chapter 34, the pillar of cloud descends upon the isolated tent, and we know that Moses goes inside and talks to God, not as a lowly subject before his divine creator, but as a friend.
It's interesting how often aliens get pulled into the world of spirituality, because even Terence McKenna, with the experiment at La Chorrera or whatever, him and his brother, I think, had this shared vision of a UFO descending upon them. Yeah. Or one of them did envisioned look like a spaceship, right? It's interesting how those worlds converge, that where there's spirituality, there's oftentimes like alien conspiracy people or you know, not always, you know what I mean? But every now and then there's an overlap.
Yeah, no, it makes sense when you're trying to, like, if you're observing the universe and you're thinking, well, like, there's got to be life out there in this infinite, you know, when you're examining the infinite, whether or not it's, you know, God or reality itself, the idea of, like, it can't just be us here on this tiny little pebble.
But you remember in, like, the 2000s and the 90s when they would have, like, a sci-fi movie and they would show the like, extremist people come to, like, boycott NASA? There would always be, like, hippies that were like, we welcome the alien. It was always, like, people that believe in crystals that also believe in aliens. I'm getting messages from the aliens.
Yes.
That's what I mean. There's like a weird overlap.
There's definitely a tie in that community, for sure.
Yes. And but the thing that I honestly keep thinking when I see that stuff is, what the heck? Why wouldn't they be like, and atop that spiral of smoke was a freaking metal giant round thing with lights on it that made like a, like, you know, like,
made
why
sounds
the description would leave out the things, you know, like, explain exactly what you saw.
Yeah.
Well, it was like a circle
you
with
could
lights.
have said like a round building with like lights that flash on and off, like, you know, lights, little fires that would burn in and off and on really quickly.
Like I don't feel comfortable being like, well, that's where we introduced King James, who took all just that out.
Yeah.
But it would be so much easier. It would kill so much of the debate here if they just said, of course we know about UFOs, because even back then they were saying there were circles with lights on them.
Yeah.
You know, very obvious description.
The Bible doesn't tell us every detail of the conversation that they had, but with this phrasing, it leads us to believe that Moses and God were buddies, that they knew each other. And from the conversations we do have, they are pretty easy with one another compared to how the prophets in previous and latter entries converse with the Almighty. Nonetheless, Moses isn't 100% trusting of God, as we see him start questioning God, to the point where he actually asks God to show himself. Luckily for Moses, God agrees. Exodus tells us, "And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But," he said, "you cannot see my face, for no one may see me live." Then the Lord said, "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." This isn't an empty promise, for in the next chapter, God is seen to descend upon the cloud, where we are told, "Then the Lord came down in the cloud, and stood there with him, and proclaimed his name, the Lord." With this, some have come to view the cloud as a vehicle, a flying vehicle, that this God obviously utilized to descend from the heavens, presumably, down to earth. What's more, this same argument that aims to categorize the cloud as some kind of mechanical vehicle goes a step further in categorizing this God as some kind of extraterrestrial.
The only people who drive around in mechanical clouds are the Care Bears, and it's quite obviously a cloud fashioned into a car. You know what I mean? You wouldn't look at the thing and be like, well, what'd you see? It was like a giant cloud.
Yeah.
You know, you'd be like, it looked metallic, or it looked like a rock with lights coming out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're looking at like a drastically different interpretation. Like the biblical narrative is that God, the creator of all of the everything, omniscient God came down and spoke to Moses, and this is like alien beings, little alien beings came down, or big alien beings came down to talk to him, and said, "You can't look at me, you can't see me."
I'm looking at you right now.
I know.
Turn around.
Yeah, I was confused by one of the images there. It, like, had the classic old, like the bearded old man version of God. I was like, why are you showing that in the part where you're talking about he could not see him?
Symbolically, you know, I had a little thought there why he couldn't look him at the face. You always see the back of me, but you can't see me in the face. I was like, what if symbolically that's because when you look at God, you see yourself, and you're like, it's just me, you know, face melt, Ark of the Covenant style.
Yeah, that's interesting.
One who was mistaken by Moses and the Israelites as a god, but was in actuality more of a creator. Indeed, our creator to be sure, but one who was not omnipotent. The idea hinges on the ancient alien or Anunnaki theory, which I won't be going into this episode, but that basically, this god was one of many beings that genetically altered Neanderthal man, for various reasons, and then stuck around to see how things played out, choosing to involve themselves with man's affairs such as times like these. Anyway, let's for argument's sake say that this cloud was some kind of UFO, even though God does specify earlier in chapter 19 of Exodus that he'll be appearing as a dense cloud. Is there any other evidence that supports the more extraterrestrial side of things? One interesting concept that people who support this argument bring up is that God here does tell Moses that his own face must not be seen. Traditionally, readers of the Bible associate this with Moses not being pure enough to gaze upon God, not because Moses was a bad person, but because no one was pure enough to witness the Lord in his true form. The implication, according to many biblical passages, is that those who gaze upon the holiest of holies is that they'll burst into flames, drop dead immediately, or simply just cease to exist. So this precaution by God may just be in line with that particular belief. However, proponents of the UFO argument suggest that the reason why Moses was told to look away could be because of some kind of radiation, or some kind of space bacteria that would have destroyed his immune system. You'll notice that in chapter 34 of Exodus, before God appears, he does give Moses specific instructions before his arrival, saying that Moses should stand on a specific mountain at a specific point in the day, and that no one, not even the animals, should be at the mountain when he emerges. In essence, this God tries to safeguard Moses from something: holy incineration, biological contamination, or maybe he was just being coy. The topic remains up for some debate. Interestingly, he does tell Moses, "And it shall come to pass, while my glory passeth by, that I will put thee in a cleft of the rock, and will cover thee with my hand while I pass by, and I will take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen." Whilst not a renowned idea, I've seen some members of the UFO school of thought believe that this is God, or the alien God, telling Moses that if he stands exactly where he's being told, at exactly the right time, he will see the back parts of God, as in the back part of the spaceship, which...
It's not totally crazy to think that part of the being, whatever came to him, by actually being able to see the person of it, like, we don't know. There's so many variables in the realm of infinite variables. You know, what if looking at this thing, you know, does kill you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
like, yeah.
Supposedly, Moses glimpsed as it passed him by. Traditionally, of course, this is not something that is acknowledged, and the idea of this being a spaceship, or that there's any kind of spaceship, is commonly dismissed. After meeting God and coming back to the Israelites, Moses' face is described as being radiant, which some believers of UFOs attribute to being horrifically burned, considering his followers are seen to be scared of him.
That's such a negative take on that. I always loved that part that Noah was radiant, that he was glowing, or Moses. Isn't there even a part where they have to put a bag over his head, or they have to like cover his head because he's glowing?
Yeah, I can't remember that part, but something like that rings a bell.
Yeah, I always thought that was kind of a neat little story, and they're like, it's because of horrific burns.
Oh, jeez.
Or radiation, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's radiation off the thing.
Like from the beam that came down, it rubbed a bit of it off on him, and so like when it came down, everyone else could get it.
Because why would you cover it up if it was just glowing? You'd be like, look at this guy, he glows.
Awesome.
Yeah.
When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. Traditionally, we are led to believe that the reason why Moses' face was radiant is because after speaking with God, his body took on this sort of divine or magical glow that was evident in his face. It aimed to show believers that by speaking with God, or being close to God, one could appear as though they stood out above the rest, that their skin would literally glow, and that they would have a physical quality about them that was not exhibited by anyone else.
Well, we've talked about like spiritual teachers in the past, and that we've heard that if you're around them, they kind of like emit some type of like a presence.
Love. Sometimes people say they radiate like love.
Yeah.
Like I've heard some people go, get around enlightened people. Go be around them.
Yeah.
Because you'll pick up some of what they're radiating.
Yeah. And if I had to throw my hat in here and take a guess, I bet you that was kind of what was going on. You'd been gone for like a long time. Wasn't it like 40 days or something? Like, didn't he go for like a long time? And then he came back and everyone was like, like they wanted to be around him. Yeah.
But believers on the other side of the coin that hope to portray these pillars of cloud and fire as UFOs and this god as an extraterrestrial being take a different approach. The belief here is that despite this being's warnings and precautions, Moses did get too close, and his face was burned by some kind of radiation. To quote earlier from chapter 24 of Exodus, we are told, "When Moses went up to the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the 7th day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. With this explanation, extraterrestrial believers attempt to conflate this cloud that shrouds the mountain with possible fumes or gas that is emitted from some kind of craft, and that it is these fumes and gases, or clouds, that caused the radiation to burn Moses' face. There exist some holes in this theory, however. For one, only Moses' face is described as being radiant, or burned if you'd like to adopt the contending argument. If these were radioactive fumes and gases, then it seems likely that the entirety of Moses' body should be burned, especially seeing as Moses spent 40 days up there. Furthermore, Moses does descend from the mountain.
What was he eating for those 40 days?
Yeah,
just
maybe
blood
he
of
was
lamb?
fasting.
Huh?
Maybe he was fasting.
40 days? They just throw that term around like, how many? 40 days is a long time to fast.
Oh, a long time. But...
No water? You can't make it 40 days with no water.
And there's got to be some type of a sacred element in there between 40 days, because isn't that what Jesus did? 40 days, 40 nights in the desert?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that like, it's got to be something sacred about the number 40.
Yeah, numerologically speaking.
To question Aaron and the other Israelites' transgressions, and is not described as being radiant or burned here. This only takes place after Moses requests to see God. A challenging argument might say that either the gases or fumes became radioactive over time, or that Moses' face did not respond to the radiation immediately. But it seems more likely the case that Moses was radiant because of the traditional idea that this was a physical reaction to having seen, spoken, and embraced God. When the Israelites stare up at the mountain, the glory of God looked like a consuming fire atop the mountain. Another idea that UFO enthusiasts put forward is that this is exactly what a UFO landing would have looked like to the Israelites in the desert below, that they would have stared up at the mountain in awe of this mechanical beast, but so unable to describe what they were seeing, could only relate to us the ferocious fire that blazed out of what can only be assumed was some kind of thruster or the nozzle of a rocket. This is an echo compared to the events seen in chapter 19 of Exodus, where we are shown God first descending on the mountain, where we are told, "On the morning of the third day, there was a thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently." Traditionally speaking, biblical readers would associate
Incredible
this
God.
terrifying imagery with the power of God, whose sheer appearance alters the environment around him with thunder, lightning, and the sounds of one dramatic trumpet blast. It sets the stage for the almighty character of God, a figure that was meant to be revered.
Also, it's not good to be too judgmental of those early people. Like, when you think about it, it's like the descriptions of hell, it's like fire and brimstone.
Yeah.
That's also just happens to be what happens when you look into the earth, downward into volcanoes. They look like fire. They look like hell.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to be like, those stupid humans, they just called the, middle of the earth hell because it's all fiery. But at the same time, it's like, they didn't have any science. They didn't have anything, you know? They did pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Considering they didn't know what was going on. They built modern society from that ground floor.
Yeah.
Even if it was a confusion.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
feared, and not taken lightly by anyone. With this entrance, God commands the attention of the Israelites, whether they are believers or not, without even having to say anything. Coincidentally, believers of the UFO side of things aim to exemplify this event as yet another instance where an extraterrestrial spaceship has descended onto the Earth. Again, it leads with the idea that the witnesses at the time did not have the vocabulary or understanding to adequately convey what they were seeing, and so they relied on simple words to illustrate what they had experienced: thunder, lightning, clouds, and trumpets.
Yeah.
According to those on the other side of the argument, these could have just as easily been the rumble of an engine, the sound barrier breaking, the smoke from a craft's ventilation, and the various flashing lights that might have permeated the external hull. According to Xavier Hayes in his book Ancient Aliens, he tells us of this particular event, saying, "These descriptions are too detailed to be interpreted as visions or memories of atmospheric phenomena, which nomads were certainly used to experiencing. Nor can it be interpreted as artistic flair dressed up in order to amaze the reader. We are reading about extraordinary events witnessed by an entire group of people, a specific phenomenon that was an unquestionably new experience to those people, which consisted of images, sounds, and situations that were caused by the presence of something that manifested very powerfully by technological means." Let me know in the comments below what you think about UFOs in the Bible, and are there any other instances where UFOs might have slipped their way in without anyone realizing?
I don't know if I buy that last point either. Like, first of all, well done video. That was a great video. But I don't know if I buy that point that they would have been used to this sort of stuff. No, there are meteorological events that could happen, especially when people, maybe the lifespan was shorter, you only live 30 years. There's things that happen that aren't easily understood, like you can Google them and it's like, oh, apparently there could be like fireballs in the sky that are like scientifically explainable. But with no YouTube, no nothing, it's not crazy to think that like a wild enough storm or something, people will be like, that was God back then.
Yeah, no, that was a really well done video, very fascinating, and all just revolving around the Jews at Mount Sinai. I thought they were gonna like break into other sections of the Bible and stuff like that. But yeah, that's a interesting way to look at it.
I wonder if the aliens, like if they do visit Earth, are having issues with all the garbage floating around the planet at this point. Because apparently like we're like making it treacherous territory out there in the stratosphere, whatever, just
all
around
stuff
the Earth.
Floating around
just like
the Earth.
apparently it's getting garbagey.
Yeah, space garbage.
Yeah.
But guys, if you liked our reaction on this video, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, share this with a friend, and everyone, till next time, stay spiritual.